Good evening. You're listening to the Fantasy Express here at Ball State University. You can follow us on Twitter at BSU Fantasy. Tweet us your questions, concerns for this week and these matchups. I'm joined in the studio tonight alongside analyst Eric Alcantor, analyst Steven Sobek. I'm your host, Jesse Cordray. Along with us tonight inside the studio is Cameron Cole, our communication director. Gentlemen, good evening. How are we doing tonight?
I'm currently losing my battle with my cold. It's not been going too well, but I'm here to do the show because this is what we do on Thursdays.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I do want to make a comment. I love the term analyst. It's a great title, but communications director, give a shout out to Cameron Cole on that one because that's impressive. That sounds very important, and I like that.
Well, he is important to us. Again, you can follow us on Twitter at BSU Fantasy. I'd like to turn our attention to talk about the 1 o'clock hour on Sunday, November 13th, Denver at New Orleans. This was an impressive game by both sides, a hard-fought matchup. Steven, I'll talk to you first. Your thoughts on the game, and more importantly, what's your thoughts on Denver's defense as they went into a bye this week?
Well, Denver's defense has been consistent, and it is struggling a little bit more with Aqib Talib being out and their secondary having to move around positions a lot. This game was really interesting because there was a blocked point after attempt that was returned for a 2-point conversion on the other end. So that was really probably one of the first times I've seen that in the NFL.
I was waiting for that to happen. As soon as they brought in the live ball off of a blocked extra point, I was waiting for a game to come down to something like that, and so I'm really glad that happened. But as for fantasy things, the volume was there for Devontae Booker. He had 24 carries, but he only gets 76 yards against one of the more mediocre run defenses in the league. So that was probably a little concerning for you. But the good news is Capri Bibbs didn't see anywhere near the action that some people might have been fearing that he'll see. Also, Demaryius Thomas, on the other hand, took advantage of his matchup. 14 points in the second highest season total for him. That's pretty good for you, all things considered.
Yes, it is. And switching to the other side of the ball in this game, New Orleans is in a real bind with their running backs, and not in a bad way, just for fantasy owners, because Mark Ingram and Tim Hightower are sharing the carries almost 50-50. And I know Eric has Mark Ingram on his team, and he's definitely concerned with that.
I actually traded Mark Ingram for Des Bryant.
That's an amazing move.
It worked out this week. We'll see if it keeps working out. But the truth is, look, Mark Ingram has 63 yards. Tim Hightower has 55.
Yeah, who did you con into that one? Because
you'd say it's a con, but think about it. Des Bryant was coming off a 2-reception, 19-yard game. I mean, it was a buy low. I'm not afraid to admit that, especially after Ingram's 30-point explosion. The point we're trying to make here is that there's no real clear answer in this backfield. I think the truth of it is it's a committee and not a very effective one for fantasy purposes, because any week either guy could be very valuable or both guys could be complete stinkers for you. It's just kind of going to depend on matchup.
Yeah, definitely the case in New Orleans. I do want to touch on Michael Thomas, who put the ball on the turf twice this week.
He had 40 receiving yards and 2 fumbles
so
lost.
It canceled out.
So he actually ended up with 0 points. That's brutal.
And we all know Sean Payton doesn't like fumbles because Mark Ingram was benched for them. And I don't expect Michael Thomas, one of the leading receivers in their offense, to be benched because of it. But if it continues, that might be the case. These were his first 2 fumbles of the season. And Willie Snead, speaking of receivers, 2 touchdowns. Former Ball State Cardinal, we're really proud of him.
I told you to start him. I didn't really see the 2 touchdown things coming, but the Broncos are vulnerable in the slot right now because of Aqib Talib's injury. It pushes Chris Harris out into the outside. So just keep that in mind going forward for slot receivers, although I don't imagine it to continue with an offense not as good as New Orleans coming up.
Well, gentlemen, let's go ahead and progress through. I know that we've got several games we'd like to talk about tonight. I'd like to pay peace of mind specifically to one game that I don't believe is on either of your radars here to talk about tonight, but something that I'd like to discuss. Time and time again, Eric, you say RELAX. Green Bay at Tennessee turned into a travesty for the Packers. They're on a downward spiral quickly. Can this dominating, or should I say once dominating team, rally themselves here in the next few weeks to get themselves at a better standing for the playoffs?
I mean, probably. They do this every year, it seems. They go into this funk, and I realize this season it seems to be worse than it has in previous years. But the truth of it is, for fantasy purposes, I don't see really too much cause for concern. Aaron Rodgers is having to throw this ball. I think personally you're rooting for the other team to keep scoring because Aaron Rodgers has to keep throwing. And yeah, some weeks it's a little ugly, and yeah, I can't believe I'm saying this, but Aaron Rodgers in garbage time is starting to become some of your best bets. But I mean, as far as you're concerned as a fantasy owner, you don't care if it's the first quarter or the fourth quarter, overtime. Wherever the points come from, that's what you want. And especially with a quarterback like Aaron Rodgers, who's the third best quarterback in fantasy this season, you're not complaining.
I would argue that you wouldn't want anybody else to be your garbage time quarterback than Aaron Rodgers. And I had the benefit of starting Devontae Adams on a couple of rosters, and I was really happy that Tennessee posted 40-plus points on their defense because that meant a lot of fantasy production for both Rodgers and all of his receivers. And they benefit from the fact that their division and nobody in it has separated themselves from the bunch. We've got Detroit, middle of the pack. Chicago's way down low, and Minnesota has struggled as of late. So I don't think from a division and standings standpoint that they're in trouble. I really don't think so.
You know who's not in trouble? Dallas.
Well, then let's go ahead and let's get into this. Let's talk about Dallas at Pittsburgh. We saw an emotional Tony Romo this week in a press conference, commending Dak Prescott, encouraging him, ensuring that he will be behind him as the backup quarterback to ensure an overall successful Dallas Cowboys offense here moving into the next week. Your thoughts on Tony Romo's move specifically, Eric, and the assurance that Jerry Jones might have a highly competitive team?
I think it comes down to the fact that Dak Prescott has been so effective. He makes so little mistakes. And Tony Romo, time and time again, the issue with him has always been he throws that one interception.
The big interception.
Yeah, he's the accident waiting to happen, as Stephen A. Smith always says. You know who's not an accident waiting to happen? To this point in the season, the fantasy MVP, Ezekiel Elliot. He gets you 38 fantasy points with 3 total touchdowns. Stephen, do you really think there's anybody else that can be considered fantasy MVP to this point in the season?
No. After this last game, Elliott is the guy. I can't believe... I mean, we're talking Clinton Portis he's coming after because just insane that long touchdown reception he had out of the backfield, plus 2 more rushing touchdowns, 38 total points in standard scoring is just unbelievable. And even though their offensive line in Dallas is terrific, you can't expect 38 points, and he's really providing some consistency for them out of the backfield. Definitely, in my opinion, MVP so far.
A lot of people might have drafted Le'Veon Bell as their late season MVP. You know, he had to miss the first 3 for that suspension. But on the other side, Pittsburgh seems to be falling apart at the seams. There's a lot of questions as to whether or not Mike Tomlin is on the hot seat now because of the way the team has performed. I know how much Jesse loves his coaches on the hot seat.
This is probably the 3rd season in a row now we're talking Mike Tomlin hot seat.
Well, the issue, the Steelers don't fire coaches. I think they've had 4, like in the past 30 years. That's crazy, right?
Tradition.
And one of them being the great Bill Cowher, of course. Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell constantly hog targets in this passing game, so I think it's a little concerning for me if you want the second option in this offense in terms of wide receivers, because the truth is they had 4 tight ends play at least 10 snaps each. Eli Rogers, Kobe Hamilton, Sammy Coates, all players that are getting run out there. If you're picking one, I know I was down on Eli Rogers last week. That was a bad call by me. It's clear that he has a role in this offense. I don't know if it's one that's startable every week, but it's one that you can keep an eye on and plug and play given your situation.
Yeah, Pittsburgh has their favorites, and they are Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell. And every person around them is just simply a role player, could get you a touchdown randomly, but you can't trust them. So Le'Veon Bell had 9 catches for 77 yards and a score this past week. That's receiving. And I did say Pittsburgh's game plan should revolve around Bell out of the backfield catching the ball, and it did, but it just wasn't enough against Dallas. They couldn't stop anybody.
Yeah, they could not stop a nosebleed on Sunday. In one of the better games of Sunday for sure. I would say game of the day by far. Another really good one, Seattle at New England, was a classic on a Sunday night, just as it was in the Super Bowl and just as it was a couple of years ago when they last played in the regular season. I warned you about Christine Michael. I had a feeling that he was on his way out of favor there in Seattle. I didn't anticipate him getting waived, but I did see his carries going down. And so it looks to me like they're ready to ride Thomas Rawls and C.J. Prosise going forward. I think C.J. Prosise is the play this week, but we'll talk about that a little more later. Also impressing this week was yes, even I, the most critical Russell Wilson critic in the world, was at least a little impressed by Russell Wilson's ability to go and tear up the New England defense in Foxborough was the big one for me, because I've seen it happen to so many great quarterbacks in primetime games. They go to New England and they absolutely shrink. So my congratulations go out to Russell Wilson for proving me wrong.
Yes, and I would say we just got done talking about what we said was the best game of the week. To me, this was the most surprising. I did not expect Russell Wilson to go into Foxborough and put up the kind of numbers that he did and look more like old Russell Wilson than the Russell Wilson we've seen this year. Definitely a positive sign for Seattle. CJ Prosise and Thomas Rawls will probably split carries for this next game simply because Rawls hasn't seen action for many weeks. What do we think as far as Russell Wilson goes? How close is he to returning to his old form?
Well, let's not get carried away here. Old form takes new form. We've seen a quarterback behind that's come back and won key games, clutch plays, impressive drives. But you brought up a couple things that I think overall gives Russell Wilson the ability to thrive where he is, and that's the understanding that his coaching staff and his play calling helps him play in those tough games. This week,
run around, make something happen, and throw it, chuck the ball downfield.
He's right, because the game plans going into New England are so important, because Bill Belichick's going to take your best things away from you. So what did they do? 3 touchdowns to Doug Baldwin. They did not take away your best option there whatsoever.
And I think that plays directly into it. You talked about the Steelers' issues here. I think that they've got some struggles within the coaching staffs, maybe dissent on the play calling, but collectively you've got to give it to Russell Wilson and his ability to be flexible and to play multiple different spreads on offense.
Jesse, I'm going to ask you, without looking at the notes, who had more touchdown passes this week, DeMarco Murray or Tom Brady?
DeMarco Murray.
That is correct. DeMarco Murray had a passing touchdown this week. It was a fun little play that they ran to my good friend Delaney Walker.
But he knows him personally.
Yes,
actually.
I do. Tom Brady did not throw a touchdown pass this week, which I didn't really see coming. I mean, I know the Seahawks are a very good defense, but I thought on a short week, and it's Tom Brady, so I wasn't too concerned. He did have 316 passing yards. It wasn't a complete dumpy performance, but the truth of it is, should we be talking about the Tom Brady retirement?
Retirement, yes. I did pose that question because the last time he had one of these games, it was against Kansas City, and people were thinking, all right, when's he going to hang it up? So, no, we're not talking about retirement.
He's playing the 49ers this week. Do not worry.
Yeah,
it will happen.
I mean, we're talking huge numbers for Brady if he's really on his game, which he should be. Again, it was just kind of one of those things where he didn't find the end zone through the air because Blount had 3 touchdowns on the ground. So not because they weren't effective, but because he just didn't get those opportunities. Martellus Bennett had 7 catches for 102 yards. Gronkowski is questionable. He had that, a punctured lung, I believe.
A very, very painful sounding injury, and it's not looking like he's going to play. So Martellus Bennett's one to keep an eye on.
Especially against a team that cannot defend tight ends very well. So I do like Bennett and also LeGarrette Blount, who, like I said, scored 3 times against Seattle at home last week. They like him around the goal line. There's no reason to shy away from him on your roster.
Especially when it looks like they'll probably be running the ball to put this one away.
Yep.
Okay, well then let me go ahead and ask this question before we transition into talking about Week 11. Among other teams besides the Patriots, we've got Denver coming up, rising in the AFC West. You've got Oakland. Are these teams set on cruise control, or are these teams needing to make pivotal decisions to help improve their offensive strategy?
Well, I would say New England, there's no such thing as cruise control for them, but I think as long as they stick to what they do, they should be okay. Oakland and Denver, not so much cruise control because that division is so competitive out west, I think.
Well, and I don't disagree with that right there. But when you look at, in my opinion right now, between Denver and New England, Denver's got the better defense. So I think that all the way around, their defense is okay, but we're talking about decisions that are going to get the ball into the end zone. So what do they do?
I would like to point out that the Patriots offense, as effective as it's been since Brady's return, hasn't been very Patriots-like, and I'll say it because they end up in a lot of 3rd and longs. I was reading a post about it. Somebody mentioned that you'll know the offense is clicking when they're no longer in these situations, and they haven't really avoided them yet. Again, I'm not saying it's any cause for concern. Certainly it's one of the best quarterbacks to rely on in those situations in a 3rd and 11, but it is something to look at because that's not something that they really want to game plan around, is ending up in a 3rd and long.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for your input. Let's move into Week 11. We've got 4 teams on bye: Atlanta, Denver, the New York Jets, and San Diego. Eric, do you want to go ahead and tell us about the quarterbacks in which we should pay attention to this week?
Well, hopefully you weren't starting Bryce Petty in fantasy this week, and you might be thankful the Jets are on a bye. But Matt Ryan, Phillip Rivers, the people you want to replace. Colin Kaepernick against New England. He's proving himself to be a pretty reliable fantasy option. His legs are giving him a nice floor. So I don't anticipate New England completely dominating him the entire game. I imagine eventually he'll break off a long run, a long pass, get in the end zone, something. Also, Joe Flacco against Dallas. Dallas's defense doesn't inspire me after this past week against Pittsburgh, so that's one that I think could be good.
I like Kaepernick as well. More of a high volume play because he's going to be playing in that garbage time that we all love as fantasy owners. I also think you have to give a look to Jared Goff. It's his first NFL start, but you have to be optimistic. It's got to be better than Case Keenum, right?
Does it? Does it really?
Yeah, well, there's a...
I mean, we'll see, but
I think it could benefit some other guys in the offense, not necessarily Goff.
That's
But
true. Speaking of
Okay, let's go ahead and talk about the wide receivers. We've got Jones, Thomas, and Marshall out. Who should we fill in?
If you're a Brandon Marshall owner, you might actually be thankful that they're making the decision for you this week to bench Brandon Marshall because it's been brutal this season. Someone I mentioned last week in passing was Cameron Meredith. With Alshon Jeffrey now being out for 4 games because of his PED suspension, I think he's the de facto number 1 in that offense, and that may not be a great thing, seeing as they played absolutely terrible this week. Their offense was pretty bad. But against the New York Giants, who are the 27th ranked pass defense, I'd say something's got to happen there.
Yeah, I would say so. I would go with Zach Miller is probably the number 1 option. As far as receivers go, Cameron Meredith should definitely see some targets from Cutler. A guy that I want to talk about now, and I'm surprised didn't make it on Eric's list for bye-week fill-ins, is Rashard Matthews, because he caught another touchdown pass this week, and he's just been one of the most sneaky receivers in terms of production that we've seen. So you can't shy away from him at all. And another guy that I also like is Jeremy Curley. We talked about the high volume that Kaepernick will get in the New England game, and he will have to throw to somebody, and I think it could be Jeremy Curley this week. He's only 13% owned, and like I said, pass-heavy offense for the 49ers, trying to play catch-up at home against New England.
To the running backs, my favorite position, CJ Prosise, available in still 40% of leagues. I get that's not a very high number, but he's out there, and that's a lot of leagues still. It's not a great matchup against Philadelphia, but he is also one of the better pass-catching backs on the roster. I don't think Thomas Rawls is ready for a full workload, so I still think CJ Prosise is the play this week. I also like Jalen Richard against Houston, mainly because of the Mexico City. The pollution and the altitude, I think, really is going to lead to some more rotations. They were already showing it against Denver, their willingness to just pound the ball into their opponent's lines. So I think there is some value outside of Latavius Murray in the Oakland backfield. Steven, Paul Perkins?
Yeah, Paul Perkins is the dart throw. He gets some snaps behind Rashad Jennings. Their running game is just bad in New York for the Giants. You got to give him a look, especially if you just need a fill-in, maybe in your running back 2 slot or a flex. But I will have to say, that might be the single greatest reason for playing somebody because of pollution.
I mean, it's the truth. I really think they will rotate players in and out a little more than
and
they normally
elevation
would.
as well, definitely. And transitioning to the tight end position, Eric and I like Vernon Davis.
Yeah, if Deshaun Jackson can't play, especially because that's one less playmaker Kirk Cousins had. Not that Deshaun Jackson's had a great year, but he does get on the field. So that takes away a little bit from Vernon Davis's production. The truth of it is, against Green Bay, they're probably going to be throwing all day, and, I mean, I don't see them stopping it. Delaney Walker, Anthony Fasano, you name them, they were killing it for the Titans against Green Bay. I don't expect that trend to change. Zach Ertz.
Zach Ertz made my list for a second consecutive week. He's really Carson Wentz's safety blanket at the tight end position. He did well. He got 6 catches for 55 yards last week. Definitely, if you need a fill-in, look for him to give you some production. He's done well for me, so I'm going to stick with Zach Ertz.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for your Week 11 updates with the 4 teams on the bye. Again, Atlanta, Denver, the New York Jets, and San Diego. If you're listening, please sit tight. We will be back right after the break. You're listening to the Fantasy Express here in the WCRD studios. You're back in the WCRD studios listening to the Fantasy Express. You can follow us on Twitter at BSU Fantasy. I'm Jesse Cordray, the host of the Fantasy Express, joined alongside analyst Eric Alcantar and analyst Steven Sobek. If you're just now tuning in, a couple pieces of information we'd like you to pay close attention to. There are 4 teams on bye this week: Atlanta, Denver, the New York Jets, and San Diego. Moving on to talk about this week's matchups, we're going to skip over talking about Thursday night's matchup tonight, the New Orleans Saints at the Carolina Panthers, and we're going to move into the 1 o'clock hour on Sunday, Baltimore at Dallas. Steven, we'll talk to you first.
Well, for Baltimore, Steve Smith, out of absolutely nowhere, has a lot of relevance in this game. He caught 5 passes for 60 yards and a touchdown against Cleveland, and Baltimore's going to have to throw the ball because they've had some issues in the run game. I like Steve Smith to maybe catch a touchdown against Dallas on the road.
Yeah, Steve Smith has actually revitalized himself, and I think this is about the 3rd or 4th year in a row that we can say that.
Yeah.
Steve Smith just always, the ageless wonder, the man just never seems to disappoint. He talked about it a little bit, but I want to re-emphasize Terrence West and Kenneth Dixon are moving closer and closer to what is becoming a 50-50 split in the Baltimore backfield, and until one of them starts performing in a way that you can trust them, it's hard for me to say that I want to start the Baltimore running back in a given week. This isn't the worst matchup in the world, don't get me wrong, but Dallas loves to, pound the ball and chew up the clock. So the truth of it is the run games for other teams just aren't as effective against teams that are holding the ball for as long as they normally do.
Speaking of running the ball and chewing up clock, Ezekiel Elliot, we got done talking about him earlier. I'm just going to mention again, 38 points last week. You can't shy away from him. He's definitely your running back 1 against Baltimore. It doesn't matter who he faces at this point, I don't think. So Ezekiel Elliott for sure. And then Jason Witten was a guy that I said you shouldn't go to because he is touchdown dependent. It worked out last week. I think he has a better potential of scoring against Baltimore this week, but I'm not really crazy about the matchup. Baltimore is very solid against tight ends.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't the best matchup. The Baltimore defense has been in and out of relevance this season. But the truth is, I'm not scared of them either. So if you have Des Bryant, for example, I would expect a little more closer to, 8 or 9 points, 80 receiving yards. Maybe he gets in the end zone again. I don't know. It just kind of depends the way game flow goes. I expect more out of Cole Beasley. Again, Dak Prescott and Cole Beasley, that's not going away no matter what happens. So, again, I don't think Des Bryant's going to be the number 1 wide receiver you may have drafted, but I think he's going to have a pretty good shot at just getting just below that, high-end wide receiver 2 numbers, low-end wide receiver 1 numbers in a given week.
Right, there's definitely a neutral feeling about this game in terms of production, I would say, for the most part, on both sides.
I would have to agree. Let's get in a little bit deeper here. Let's talk about Tennessee at Indianapolis. Indy now being back on the map here. Eric, we know that this is a passion of yours to talk about the Indy offense and the struggling then defense. Your thoughts in this matchup? Can Indy best Tennessee at home?
Well, this should be a good sign of how good coaching really is, because when you come off a bye, there's no reason to look bad whatsoever. And the Colts have had a history of coming off the bye and perhaps not looking as sharp as they normally do. It takes them a couple of quarters to get into the game like it does in a normal week. So the truth is, I expect a very high-scoring game. I don't think a lot of people would maybe think that at first, but let's face it. The Tennessee defense had no answer for the Colts last time, and the Colts defense really had no answer for Tennessee last time either. So I would expect more of the same. Dante Moncrief, maybe a little more touchdown dependent right now, but coming off the bye, he should be 100% off of that injury. And so I'm expecting big things really out of everybody in the Colts offense.
Yeah, the Colts have definitely created the term bye week hangover because they are notoriously slow starting the week after such a rest period. For the Colts and Tennessee for that matter, this game is projected to be the highest scoring this week. I always pay attention to what the Vegas odds can try to tell us about the game. It's got the highest total, so I don't see either offense slowing down at all in this game. Like you said, Moncrief, I don't know if he's necessarily as touchdown dependent as we might like to think, because he did have a great game against Green Bay without scoring a touchdown. So he might find the end zone, but I still think he's a solid wide receiver option regardless for the Colts.
Well, and I think in this matchup, I'm going to go ahead and interject some small opinions here. I think that this is the week, again, where we may see the rise of Jack Doyle in the end zone.
Jack Doyle.
Again, Jack Doyle rises again, or Jack Doyle strikes back.
In any event, I think that this is a week where Tennessee strategizes themselves to match up a little bit better on the wide receivers. I think they're going to put pressure directly on T.Y., Moncrief, and I think that we are going to see a versatile backfield for Indy. Whether it be the flying Andy Luck in the end zone, again, that we've seen against the Kansas City Chiefs, I'm not sure. But I think that this is definitely a matchup to watch and something to see Indy propel forward. Moving forward here, I'd like to talk about Chicago at the New York Giants. An impressive win for the Giants. Without bias, I say this. The light this week has been on the Giants. A commendable offense. We see Eli Manning and Odell Beckham Jr. finally clicking once again. What can we see in this matchup? And can we see Chicago better themselves in the Giants' MetLife Stadium?
No. The Bears' offense is offensive.
Let me think about that. No.
The offense is offensive to me. They have a great matchup against the Tampa Bay Bucks, and I get it. It was in Tampa Bay, but they looked awful.
Yeah.
So I have to give Jay Cutler some credit because I actually thought that he might be turning some kind of corner in his life when he had that performance against the Minnesota Vikings. I was impressed. I came on the show and I apologized for saying that it would be a heinous attempt at offense. He comes out of the bye and he looks like that. I mean, I don't know what to say to that. And now he lost Alshon Jeffrey. So someone has to get the targets. I get that. I like Cameron Meredith. Maybe you like Eddie Royal instead. Eddie Royal does have a better track record with Jay Cutler. I mean, barely. But, hey, they've got to come.
No pun intended here. Barely.
Barely. Somebody has to catch the ball, right? I mean, they can't possibly look that bad again, especially against that putrid pass defense.
Yeah, the Jay Cutler apology is officially revoked on the other side.
I'm sorry for apologizing.
Yeah, but I did say last week, I came on and I said, you know what? Chicago has a great matchup. And Eric said, Jay Cutler's turning a corner. Therefore, they will do absolutely nothing against Tampa Bay. And, you know, they didn't do anything. So I don't think they're going to be much better against the Giants, that's for sure. Zach Miller, I mentioned previously, is going to be the go-to guy in the passing offense. They have to throw to somebody, so it's got to be Zach Miller. Cutler has shown that he can complete a lot of passes to his tight end.
Yeah, and speaking of things that may be coming out of hibernation, the Giants' run game was pretty brutal the past couple of weeks. They came out of the bye, a new dedication to running the ball. Rashad Jennings ends up getting 15 carries for 87 yards, while Paul Perkins ends up getting himself 9 for 31. I mean, it's not great, especially if you're Paul Perkins' owner, because you probably wanted Rashad Jennings to struggle, so Paul Perkins would continue to get the ball. But, I mean, if you have Rashad Jennings, it's not a great matchup because the Bears' run defense has been sneakily good this season. I just think that the Giants have recommitted to running the ball, which is better for their offense overall, especially when Eli still looks like Eli Manning sometimes. There was a brutal interception during that game. It blows the mind sometimes.
He was confused on why he threw the ball. That you saw his facial expression. They zoomed in on Eli. I do want to say it's important that Rashad Jennings is still a starter, and we have to value starters, and you have to go with him. Even though Perkins can get some carries, you have to go with Jennings. And their first drive against Cincinnati made me think they're the most genius offense. Great coaching, game plan. The first plays, drove down the field, scored against Cincinnati. After that, it was not good. Yeah. It was not good. And
this was a messy game for what was a fairly high-scoring affair, all things considered.
So the Giants are hot and cold throughout even a quarter. They can just go silent. I like Odell Beckham to have a great game against Chicago, who can't defend the pass. And if you need somebody that can get you another score, Sterling Shepard, he scored twice in the last 2 weeks. I really like him as a flex if you need it.
And this Stevens' bold prediction of the week, Odell Beckham Jr. will have a good game against a bad defense.
Yes.
Back to you, Jesse.
Let's go ahead and talk in the 4 o'clock hour, or rather the 4 o'clock window. Miami at the Los Angeles Rams. Let's give it to LA here. They've transitioned from St. Louis to LA rather well. They're superseding kind of my overall expectations for a new team in a new city, or rather back to their old city. Let's pay special close attention here to the LA offense. Steven or Eric, your thoughts here on what we can see out of this against the Miami Dolphins defense?
Well, the transition's been rough in the win column, I will say.
I think it's right on schedule. They're going to finish 8-8.
Yeah, so from an offensive standpoint for the Rams, you've got Case Keenum finally getting benched for Jared Goff. And I think that guys like Tavon Austin and Kenny Britt could see increased production because of Goff's play. He's going to dump the ball down a lot. They're going to have short throws in the offense to settle him down in the game. It's his first NFL start, and I really like Tavon Austin. They throw screens to him a lot. He could really benefit from Goff becoming the starter.
While I agree with you that eventually this might be good news for the St. Louis players, I don't like Jared Goff this week at all. I just think Miami is one of the hottest teams in the NFL right now. So to get his first start, granted at home, yeah, that's going to help, but he's getting his start against a team that is, he's mauling quarterbacks right now. The the Los Angeles offensive line has been, I haven't transitioned with the Los Angeles Rams apparently. They haven't been protecting Case Keenum particularly well, which only exacerbates his flaws as a quarterback. I don't like this. I can't start a single Los Angeles Ram this week at all.
Todd Gurley, if you're going to show up, please show up in this game and help your quarterback. Please.
Well, Todd Gurley has a vested interest in making this work because I can't imagine he's happy at all with Case Keenum.
No.
Okay, here, let's go ahead and talk about this next matchup. I think that I could argue it for either side that this is going to be an impressive game for the sake that Philadelphia has come off strong. But let's talk about Philadelphia at Seattle. Seattle definitely coming off of a big win against the New England Patriots. Irrefutably, we will give them that credit. It was a good game, hard fought. They got the win. Who will win this matchup in the Battle of the Birds?
Another battle of the birds.
Yes.
He likes his jokes like that for the birds. But if I'm picking a winner, I'm probably picking Seattle because it's in Seattle. I don't imagine Philadelphia's offense doing much there. Doug Peterson, naturally, he comes out last week and he says, Darren Sproles is the lead back. Ryan Matthews, then in the next game, has 19 carries, 109 yards, and 2 touchdowns.
Psych.
So, he makes us all on the fantasy shows look fantastic when, we say, Darren Sproles. And then, it wasn't a terrible game from Darren Sproles. He does get you 8 catches for 57 yards, and I did say Darren Sproles in PPR is still money after all these years. But I think it's still hard to trust anybody in that backfield other than Darren Sproles in that format because you never know what you're going to get out of Ryan Matthews. They were pounding the ball against Atlanta. They will do no such thing against Seattle.
Unless you're in a 14-man or 16-man league, I'd say pass on every single Philadelphia player except for maybe Zach Ertz as a bye-week fill-in at tight end. I don't like anybody on the road in Seattle. And transitioning to Seattle, Russell Wilson had a great performance last game. And are we getting into the point of the season where Doug Baldwin just takes total control of that offense in the passing game? Because 3 touchdowns, just impressive.
He might be taking over your fantasy lineup. I can tell you that. That is Doug Baldwin could be, a late season MVP for you, especially if you were able to sucker the owner in after a lot of down weeks.
Just like last year too, because he had at the end of last season went on a 4-week stint of catching multiple touchdown passes from Wilson. So they have a history.
Yeah, it's great. Now Philadelphia's defense is it's no soft task. It's definitely better than New England's. I think at home they will struggle to move the ball a little bit. The truth is, this is not going to be a high-scoring game. I don't think it will be anyway.
No, it won't.
I'd be surprised.
I don't think
so this could be an ugly one, a typical Seahawks, 12-6 win or something like that, right?
Praise Russell Wilson for that.
Yeah, praise Russell Wilson. He'll look totally human after this week. After I finally give him some praise. This will be a good test though of how improved Russell Wilson's mobility is because the New England Patriots pass rush made the Seattle offensive line look like Dallas Cowboys out there.
Yeah, it was not good, and Wilson had plenty of time to throw the ball. And another thing, really quick before we transition, Christine Michael getting released and signed by the Packers will open up snaps for CJ Prosise, and we don't know how many snaps Thomas Rawls will get. And just the fact that Seattle released Michael, we knew they didn't really like him in the past couple of weeks. You got that sense. But now maybe Rawls is healthier than we think.
I don't
want to believe
the reports are coming out saying that he's going to be eased back in. I'm not starting Thomas Rawls this week. I wouldn't.
And then you go and you say, okay, they really have that much faith in CJ Prosise.
I could believe it. He looked really good in that game.
He's a quick back. He can catch the ball, but blocking is an issue.
Yeah, I guess we'll see. I don't think Thomas Rawls gets, at most, maybe he gets 40% of the snaps this week. No way he gets above that number.
Well, okay, as we transition into the 8 o'clock hour, we've touched briefly on Green Bay's overall performance. I brought them up in talking about Week 10. Here we are again, Green Bay at Washington. I'm going to pose this instead of getting into the specifics here that we've done in the last few games. Let's get a discussion going here. Eric, you're gonna argue for Green Bay. Steven, you're going to argue for Washington. Why is this week important for both teams, and why is this game matter for both offenses?
Well, I'll start with, well, you know what? Let's start with the away team, and I'll give my home team case.
I mean, the Green Bay Packers are third in the NFC North right now. They are behind not only the Minnesota Vikings, but the Detroit Lions have managed to sneak their way in front of them as well. This is important because they cannot afford to have another game on national TV where they look as bad as they did against Tennessee. Will they? I doubt it. Come on. The Redskins defense is not good enough to keep them away like Tennessee's was. He's the third highest quarterback in fantasy. I'm not concerned really with the offense. I don't think that's the problem here. I think the defense is just so bad that it's starting to funnel over into the offense and a lot of frustration on that team. I can see it in Aaron Rodgers. He is so frustrated with everyone around him. In the press conferences, he called out his teammates saying, "We don't care enough. It's not mattering enough to us." Meanwhile, on the other side, Kirk Cousins has a new catchphrase.
Yeah, well, Kirk Cousins, he's definitely a different kind of fella, and Washington, the reason that it's important for Washington to get going in this game is simply they're third in their division, so that doesn't look good for them. They have to chase down Dallas somehow. And really, Green Bay's defense, like Eric just said, has not looked good at all. So there's no reason for Kirk Cousins to struggle in this game. It's almost a lot of pressure on Cousins to follow through with that expectation. They need this game really bad, and Green Bay doesn't match up well against Washington because Washington's a very tough team and it's at home. Great crowd behind them. Kirk Cousins had a very efficient game against a really good defense last week in Minnesota, and I started him over Tannehill, and I think he performed very well.
Yeah, I mean, that was really good of him to go out there and give that kind of performance against a very good defense. There were a couple of misfires, but it was a really good performance, especially without Deshaun Jackson. I just want to point out, can either of you remember the last time Washington had a Sunday night game outside of their division?
They usually play the Cowboys and the Giants, and
I'll
guess they probably play like New England sometime.
I don't have it, but the truth is, think about that. That is how important this game is to the Washington Redskins because they are finally back in that national spotlight, and they're not. Green Bay is one of the more popular teams, but this is pretty big for them. The stage is set for them to have their game.
This is great for Washington, and it is the exact same scenario that Oakland was in when they played Denver. So we've got that going, and real quickly, Jamison Crowder for Washington is a guy that could see a lot of targets if, in fact, Deshaun Jackson is unable to go. We liked Vernon Davis, but I also like Jamison Crowder because he is the lone receiving threat in that offense, aside from maybe Pierre Garçon on occasion.
I want to mention Pierre Garçon is actually been sneakily, he's got a low ceiling, don't get me wrong, but he's got a very high floor. So if you're in desperate need, you're in a 16-team, 3-wide receiver league, that's your guy because that's a really low ceiling. A really low ceiling, but a high floor. Can't ask for too much more out of that. And Jamison Crowder might be the quietest leading receiver on any team right now because he's leading the Redskins in receiving yards, and that's including Jordan Reed, who did miss some games, granted, but that's impressive.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for this discussion. Let's move forward.
You're welcome, sir.
Let's talk about Monday, November 21st, Houston versus Oakland. It's a Mexico City game. This is the first game in which the NFL has gone to play in Mexico City.
Second.
This season.
All right.
And with that as well, let's talk about a few things. Eric, you brought up the pollution. You brought up the elevation. Something that I don't think we necessarily factored in the beginning is one of these teams are coming off of a bye. This is a big matchup, not only for the teams that are playing it, but for the NFL overall in their attempt at globalizing the game. How big is this for Mexico City?
Well, I've been to Mexico City a few times in my life, and it's been a while now, but the reason I bring up the pollution, the altitude, it's 2,000 feet higher than Denver, which is a mile above sea level. So take that into consideration. It's a whole other beast there in Mexico City than it is playing in Denver. This is not going to be easy. This is a whole different country. I read an article that said the Houston Texans have been told not to leave their hotel, and that's usually a pretty standard tourist advice that you'll be given. But that's the kind of thing. That's a weird week because not only do you have to wait an extra day to play a game, now you're playing you're spending an extra day in a country that you're not familiar with. So this could be a very weird one. This could be two teams completely out of sync. I still think Oakland comes out of it feeling pretty good, though, because I like Oakland off of a bye they've had, 2 weeks to kind of prepare for this.
Yeah, this is an awkward game, I would say, for both sides. Definitely, like we said, usually not prepared to play on a Monday night. Plus, you throw in the altitude issues, and we could see a very low-scoring game. Now, I don't know exactly how the crowd breakdown will be because obviously it is closer to Houston than Oakland.
I would say that the crowd will probably be similar to one that we see in England because I'm given to understand you'll see jerseys from anywhere.
Okay, yeah, I was going to say, so we're going to see a lot of Jaguars fans in
Yeah,
Mexico
right, Jaguars.
City.
No, there are no Jaguars.
The Jaguars.
Well, not just that. Let's go ahead and open up the discussion then for this. Is Mexico City the game going to be bigger than what's been seen in Wembley Stadium?
I actually think so because there have been there were two in Wembley Stadium this season and then another one in Twickenham over in England. But I think this will be bigger because this is realistic. If they were going to move an NFL team to another country,
Right.
let's face it, it's going to be Mexico or maybe Canada. They're never putting a team in England. That can't happen. It's just so logistically hard. Mexico City, on the other hand, that could happen. That's not really that big of a difference in travel for some of these teams. So again, the reason I like the Oakland Raiders really is just the way you saw them before the bye. I mean, they can run the ball with that offensive line of theirs, which is second really only to the Cowboys. The Houston Texans are 19th against the run in the league in the past 4 weeks. That's not going to change. They had a bye, and they still couldn't figure out how to get DeAndre Hopkins the ball.
No, they're really struggling, Houston, despite their 6-3 record. I do like DeAndre Hopkins in this game for a couple of reasons. First, Oakland is 22nd ranked against receivers in terms of fantasy points relinquished. I like Hopkins with that matchup, and also Will Fuller could return this week, should open things up for Hopkins on his side of the field. But transitioning to Oakland, they have run the ball with a ton of success. The thing here is that we're going to see more of a rotation with the altitude that we mentioned, so it might not be Murray with all the carries. We mentioned Jalen Richard could get some, but I'm not really big on anybody in the Oakland backfield because of the rotation.
Well, and I don't disagree with that, but let's dive into tonight's matchup. New Orleans at Carolina. What can we see from a struggling Cam Newton in this matchup up against a very well-seasoned and in crunch time and big games, Drew Brees and the Sean Payton offense?
I mean, Cam's problem will definitely not be moving the ball. If he has a problem moving the ball in this game, I think the concern should start being a little more legitimate. Even on a short week, on a Thursday, they are at home. They have that going for them. I don't see their offense struggling, but their defense is going to have a tough task at hand. These games tend to be shootouts between New Orleans and Carolina. These are two teams that are very familiar with themselves, with each other. I think you're probably going with Jonathan Stewart this week. I know he kind of disappointed you against Kansas City, but at this point, I just don't see how you could ever sit Jonathan Stewart, especially against the Saints.
Saints have a very porous rush defense. And this is one of those games, I looked at the records for my Live at 5 report, and I couldn't believe that they both have losing records on the season. And despite that, this is one of the best Thursday night games that's been. So that speaks to Thursday night talent, but this will be an interesting game, and I think everybody across the board for both teams has above average matchups, and I think you should start them with confidence, every single guy at every single position.
I actually heavily disagree with one set of players, and that is the New Orleans backfield. I don't think you're going to see a good game out of Mark Ingram or Tim Hightower tonight. I think the Carolina Panthers rush defense, as terrible as the defense was at the beginning of the season, is still really, really good. They're giving up the third fewest points to opposing running backs this season. Mark Ingram, Tim Hightower, they're sharing the ball. That is a recipe for disaster in starting either one. If you're playing them, it's probably as your flex, but don't put anybody in your flex on a Thursday because you want that position to be open in case something happens, like injury or something like crazy in the middle of the week.
Well, gentlemen, thank you for your expertise here in this matchup. Let's go ahead and take a quick break. Again, you're listening to the Fantasy Express. Follow us on Twitter at BSU Fantasy. We're in the WCRD studios live on 91.3. We'll be back right after this break. You're back in the studio, in the WCRD studios, to be most specific, listening to the Fantasy Express. I'm Jesse Cordray, the host, alongside analyst Steven Sobek and analyst Eric Alcantor. Gentlemen, let's go ahead and talk about our weekly Eliminator Challenge here within the NFL. Eric, last week you took Arizona over San Francisco, and you won by 3 points. Steven, refreshing you took the New York Giants over Cincinnati. You won by 1 point. In my efforts to maintain here after losing last week, I took Atlanta over Philadelphia, and I lost. This week, gentlemen, who do you have and why as we go through with our Eliminator Challenge?
Well, somehow Arizona ended up having a close game at home to the 49ers, so that'll tell you where my luck is on the Eliminator these days. Still, winning is winning, so this week I am taking the Detroit Lions over the Jacksonville Jaguars. I figure Blake Bortles isn't going to win this game.
Yeah, somehow I managed to pick an even closer game than Eric did. I have the Giants. They won by just 1 point, but I will take it. I'm 9-1. Unfortunately, that one loss is killing me with the whole Eliminator concept. But I'll take New England over San Francisco this week. San Fran has the second worst pass defense in the league. I'm sorry, just total defense in the league. In terms of yards given up, Tom Brady is going to totally exploit that matchup. That's all there is to talk about in this one.
Tom Brady mentioned that in 2000 he worked out for the 49ers before they passed on him in the draft.
Revenge game.
He is not the type of person to forget that. Just keep that in mind. That's his first game in the Bay Area,
all
too.
Right, I like
the team
that.
he grew up cheering for.
Wow.
Well, with that, I have seen win after win. I've seen 2 ties back-to-back. I am on my only my 2-game losing streak is all that I've lost this challenge, and it's going to be tough. I'm going to take the Miami Dolphins this week. I'm going to stick to the sea over the land in their matchup against the LA Rams. Transitioning now to talk about our college pick'em. Steven, I'll let you kind of decide that, and then we'll get a couple discussions flowing here as we move into the matchup between Florida and the LSU Tigers.
Okay, well, the first of 3 games that we've decided to talk about this week is number 23 Florida at number 16 LSU. This is a very curious game because it was originally scheduled for, I believe, October 8th and was canceled due to Hurricane Matthew. And then the teams couldn't agree on any kind of date to play the game. They didn't have a common bye week, so they decided upon this week. And it's at LSU. It wasn't supposed to be, but now it's at LSU. Battle of top 5 defenses in this one in terms of yards allowed. Defense is pretty much deadlocked, so you have to look at a guy like Leonard Fournette on LSU's side. I really like Fournette. I think he's the best running back in the nation, despite the numbers. He missed a few games early on in the season. And another interesting fact about this game is this is a battle between 2 former Purdue quarterbacks. We're talking about Austin Appleby and Danny Etling. Etling for LSU, Appleby for Florida. So I like LSU in this game at home. The home field advantage is just too much for me, and I like Fournette to run all day.
Shout out to Donnell Pumphrey, who is the actual best running back in the country. Yard say so. I'm taking LSU in this one just because they're at home, really. I think it is going to be a really ugly game, but I think that benefits LSU in the end.
Well, and in this matchup specifically, we saw Florida lose to the University of Tennessee. They went into a few weeks there, and then they canceled that game as they were struggling to maintain their standing within the conference in the SEC and as well nationally. As respectfully as I can say this for the sake that they did cancel the game with fear for the weather proved within a few days that it wasn't going to be an issue. Yep. And I think that Florida was scared. I think that they were too greedy and too selfish to see that this game could not be in their favor. They were sandbagging, and I hope that the Tigers put it to them and show them what they're really worth.
Procrastination was not a good idea on their part because now it's at LSU. So you're looking at an even worse matchup, and they are struggling. Florida is with quarterback and who's going to lead them out there. So.
Well, and I agree, and I just think that in this particular matchup, it's with LSU here with a handedly stronger advantage. Let's go ahead and move forward. Number 22, Washington State at number 10, Colorado. Steven, your initial thoughts.
All right, well, we usually talk about Maction as Mac. I'm going to go with Paction for this one.
It's football after dark, officially.
Yes, Washington State at Colorado. 2 surprisingly ranked teams in this one. This, if the season were to end today, would be the Pac-12 title game. Who would have guessed Colorado and Washington State being the Pac-12 title game? Not me. Luke Falk for Washington State's the third best passer in the country with yardage, and Mike Leach is a guy. I showed Eric a couple of videos about Mike Leach, and boy, he's an animated coach, a fiery guy, and I really like him to lead his team on the road and make them feel comfortable in a hostile environment in Colorado, who hasn't been there. So I like Washington State.
As opposed to Washington State, who's totally been there?
Yes.
No, Mike
No,
Leach might
not
have
at
been
all.
there in his time, but Mike Leach, as much as I love him, I'm taking Colorado. Let's face it, very under-the-radar team, maybe the most underrated team in the top 10 right now. This is the 9th best defense in the country. I'm taking Colorado at home. No doubts about it.
Neither
actually.
of these teams have been there, but Mike Leach has actually been there with Texas Tech, so I like his experience.
Number 9, Oklahoma at number 14, West Virginia.
Look, I'm going with Oklahoma. The reason being, I don't trust West Virginia in a big-time game. I get they're at home, but they haven't played anyone that makes me believe that they're actually going to be able to pull this off.
Yeah, Boomer Sooner all the way in this one. Oklahoma lost 2 games, and West Virginia's only lost 1. But Oklahoma is ranked ahead of West Virginia because, first of all, quality of losses for Oklahoma is very high, with Ohio State and Houston beating them early on in the season, and also recency of loss with West Virginia just losing a couple of weeks ago. But I like Baker Mayfield to have a field day in this one against West Virginia, who's actually 19th in the country in points against, but that's going to balloon after this game. Oklahoma will play a closer game, I think, with West Virginia, especially on the road, but I like Oklahoma to beat West Virginia. And I do have a question. Who does the Big 12 need to win this game in order to keep playoff hopes alive for one of those teams?
As hard as it may be to believe, I actually think it's Oklahoma, despite their losses, because they're the name. The name recognition might get them into the playoff if they win the Big 12, but it's going to take a little more chaos than just what we have now for that to happen anyway.
Well, I would have to agree there. I'm going to go ahead and take LSU. In this next matchup, I think I'm going to take Colorado and Oklahoma. Unfortunately, we're keeping with the same routine here on our picks. However, I feel that this is maybe going to be the best course of action as I move forward in the college pick'em and eliminator challenge. Let's transition into our closing thoughts. Steven, we'll start with you.
Okay, well, I guess I technically have 3 because I would like to add, we did pretty well last week. USC beat Washington. I got you guys on that. But Jesse, go ahead and boast about the Iowa-Michigan game because you did well.
I called it. I felt it deep inside me. I was going to stay low on the game, but since you brought it up, how about Iowa taking down Michigan? Huge game. Huge, as Donald Trump would say.
Huge.
It's huge. Biggest thing that we've ever seen. Making America great. I did see a meme cast that said, while Donald Trump has been our president-elect, he's managed to keep the Michigan Wolverines to an 0-1 start.
Gosh. Well, that's a stat. But and I would like to wish my beautiful girlfriend, Anna Bills, a happy birthday. It is her birthday today. We don't discuss age. Women don't like that. I'll keep that out of it, but happy birthday. And lastly, for my final thought, I just want to open up just a quick conversation about the new college football playoff rankings.
I'm okay with them. I mean, my sticking point this week was Clemson better be ranked over Louisville. They ranked Clemson over Louisville. I'm cool with what happened.
They did a good job with that. And there's a couple of points. Wisconsin, are they the best 2-loss team? Because the committee seems to think so.
I think Oklahoma is.
I would also agree with that. Jesse?
I don't know. Going back to the overall idea here on these rankings, Clemson's been rivaling all season at being number 2. Obviously, Ohio State stuck it to them. Ohio State's seen their share of hard-fought games. Do I think Michigan deserves 3? No. They've stuck with 4. However, when you look at all of the components put together, I think that for once they stuck it in the right order.
Yeah, and I do want to make this last case. When will it be that performance in a season actually determines your ranking? Because I saw that 3-loss USC is ranked ahead of 1-loss West Virginia. And despite the fact that USC beat Washington last week and have been on an uptrend, 3 losses against a team that's just lost once, I don't know if I agree with that.
I think it has a lot to do with the Pac-12 being sneakily underrated. I think they have 5 teams in the top 25. But how many teams are you taking over USC right now?
To beat?
Because I have to tell you, the way they've played lately, they are playing very good
playing
football.
great, and I did mention that last week, and Washington couldn't hang with them.
Yeah, they could not. So I think that has a little bit to do with it. A little more human factor might have gotten them higher.
That's possible.
Eric, your final thoughts?
Yeah, for me to close here, I was going to call out Jurgen Klinnsman and the U.S. men's national team, but then I realized, well, what's the point, right? They're just going to keep him anyway. I have been a Jurgen Klinnsman supporter. Steven knows this. I can't support him anymore. They lost by a combined total of 6-1 in these last two World Cup qualifiers. They have 0 points in the Hex right now. Yeah, there are 8 games left, but something has to happen. This is unacceptable. Going to Costa Rica and losing 4-0, it's unacceptable to me, and I think it's time for a change.
Yeah, Eric's definitely been on the Jurgen Klinsmann bandwagon. I haven't been. I've been off of it, but, it's definitely meaningful for him to say that.
Well, gentlemen, thank you for joining us again live in the WCRD studios. You've been listening to the Fantasy Express. You can follow us on Twitter at BSU Fantasy. We'll be back live again next Thursday. However, we will not be here. We will be on Thanksgiving break.
Happy Turkey Day.
Yeah, have everyone spend it with your families, not at the stores, please.
And with that much said, I will close the show. Again, you've been listening to the Fantasy Express here on the WCRD